The evening sun cast long shadows across Pine Street as Marcus and Michael Thompson walked home from basketball practice. The 17-year-old twins were tired but happy after a good training session. Both boys wore their River Heights High School basketball jerseys, numbers 23 and 24, with Thompson proudly displayed across their shoulders. Marcus checked his phone and smiled. "Mom's making lasagna tonight," he told his brother. They had been the stars of today's practice, and Coach Williams had praised their teamwork. The state championships were just 2 weeks away, and the twins were determined to bring the trophy home. The boys were only 3 blocks from their house in the peaceful suburban neighborhood when a police cruiser suddenly pulled up beside them. The car's tires screeched against the asphalt as it came to a sharp stop. Officer James Barrett stepped out, his hand already resting on his weapon. "Stop right there." Barrett's voice was harsh and loud in the quiet street. "Hands where I can see them." The twins froze, their basketball bags still slung over their shoulders. They had been taught by their parents exactly what to do in situations like this. Slowly, they raised their hands. "Officer, is something wrong?" Michael asked calmly, despite his racing heart. "Shut up. Both of you, face the wall." Barrett approached them aggressively, his boots heavy on the sidewalk. Several neighbors began appearing on their porches, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived in the house they were standing in front of, started recording with her phone. Across the street, Mr. Chen, who owned the local grocery store, did the same. They had known the Thompson boys since they were little kids. There was a robbery reported. Barrett snapped, though no such report had been made. "2 suspects matching your description." Marcus spoke up, his voice steady despite his fear. "Sir, we're just walking home from basketball practice. We live 3 blocks from here, our father is." Before Marcus could finish, Barrett grabbed him roughly, slamming him against the brick wall. Michael instinctively took a step forward to protect his brother, but Barrett drew his weapon. "One more move, and you'll regret it," the officer threatened. More neighbors were gathering now. Mrs. Rodriguez had called 911, reporting Officer Barrett's behavior. Mr. Chen had called the Thompson house directly. "My badge number is 7249, Marcus said clearly, remembering his father's instructions. "Your name is Officer Barrett. This interaction is being recorded by multiple witnesses. We are unarmed minors walking home from school." Barrett's face twisted with anger. He wasn't used to young black men knowing their rights. He grabbed Marcus's arm, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. Michael stood perfectly still, tears of frustration in his eyes as he watched his brother being mistreated. Just then, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up. Dr. William Thompson stepped out, still wearing his courtroom suit. At 6'2", he was an imposing figure, but his manner was completely controlled. "Officer Barrett." Dr. Thompson's voice carried the weight of 20 years of civil rights law. "I suggest you remove your hands from my son immediately." Barrett spun around, still holding Marcus. "Stay back. This is a police investigation." "No," Dr. Thompson replied calmly, pulling out his phone. "This is a civil rights violation in progress, and I'm currently on the phone with Police Chief Martinez. Would you like to speak with him?" Barrett's face paled as he recognized Dr. Thompson, one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. His grip on Marcus loosened, and the boy quickly stepped away, rubbing his sore arm. "These are my sons," Dr. Thompson continued, his voice steady but filled with controlled anger. "They're honor students at River Heights High. They were walking home from basketball practice, 3 blocks from our house, where they've lived their entire lives." By now, 2 more police cars had arrived, responding to the neighbors' calls. Officers Wilson and Rodriguez stepped out, immediately recognizing the Thompson twins from community basketball programs. "Chief Martinez would like to speak with you, Officer Barrett." Dr. Thompson held out his phone. Barrett's hands shook as he reached for it. The evening sun had almost set now, casting an orange glow over the scene. Marcus and Michael stood close to their father, their hearts still racing but feeling safer now. The gathering of neighbors had grown, all of them recording, all of them witnesses to what had just occurred. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just the beginning. By midnight, the video of Officer Barrett's encounter with the Thompson twins had spread across social media like wildfire. Mrs. Rodriguez's recording had already reached 1 million views, and Mr. Chen's footage was being played on local news channels. The Thompson family sat in their living room, still processing the evening's events. Marcus held an ice pack to his shoulder where Barrett had slammed him against the wall. Their mother, Dr. Sarah Thompson, a respected pediatrician at City General Hospital, carefully examined the bruising on her son's arm. "We're filing charges first thing tomorrow morning," Dr. William Thompson said, his laptop open on the coffee table. Emails from civil rights organizations, news outlets, and community leaders flooded his inbox. "But this time, we're going to do more than just file a complaint. This has to stop." Michael sat next to his twin brother, still shaken by the incident. "Dad, what if he had actually pulled the trigger?" he asked quietly. The room fell silent. The question they all feared hung heavy in the air. Their mother's phone buzzed again. "The neighbors are organizing a community meeting tomorrow at the church," she announced. "Pastor Williams says over 300 people have already confirmed they're coming." Outside their house, news vans had started gathering. Local reporters stood under streetlights, doing live broadcasts. The Thompson case was becoming big news, especially given Dr. Thompson's reputation as a civil rights attorney. Early the next morning, Officer Barrett arrived at the police station to find Chief Martinez waiting for him. The police chief's face was grim as he held up the morning newspaper. The headline read, "Respected attorney's sons targeted by police officer, multiple witnesses record incident. My office. Now," Chief Martinez ordered. As they walked through the station, Barrett noticed other officers avoiding eye contact with him. His partner of 3 years, Officer Sarah Collins, turned away when he passed by. Meanwhile, at River Heights High School, Marcus and Michael walked into a completely different atmosphere. Students and teachers lined the hallways, showing their support. Their basketball teammates wore black armbands in solidarity. Coach Williams had already announced that Friday's game would be dedicated to speaking out against police brutality. During lunch break, Jessica Chen, the school newspaper editor, approached their table. "Would you be willing to tell your story for the paper?" she asked. "People need to know this isn't just something that happens in other cities. It's happening right here, to people we know." The twins looked at each other, then nodded. They had always been quiet, preferring to let their basketball skills speak for them. But now they had something important to say. Back at his office, Dr. Thompson was meeting with community leaders. Pastor Williams, local NAACP chairman Mr. Roberts, and several other prominent figures sat around his conference table. On the wall-mounted TV, national news networks were now picking up the story. "This isn't just about my sons anymore," Dr. Thompson explained, showing them a stack of files. "I've been gathering evidence for months. Officer Barrett has a history of targeting young black men, but he's not the only one. There's a pattern in this department that needs to be exposed." As they discussed strategy, Dr. Thompson's secretary rushed in. "You need to see this," she said, turning up the TV volume. Officer Barrett was giving a press conference outside the police station. "I was following standard procedure," Barrett claimed, looking nervous under the camera lights. "There had been reports of suspicious activity in the area. I was doing my job." The community leaders watched in disbelief as Barrett tried to justify his actions. But then the network split the screen, showing the clear video footage alongside Barrett's claims. His lies were obvious to everyone watching. Dr. Thompson's phone rang. It was the district attorney's office. They wanted to meet immediately. The case was growing bigger by the hour, and more people were coming forward with their own stories about Officer Barrett. In their classroom, Marcus and Michael finished their interview with Jessica. They had spoken about not just their experience, but about all the other times they had been unfairly targeted, all the times they had stayed quiet. But now, with their father's support and the community behind them, they were ready to speak up. The brothers looked out the classroom window at the gathering crowd of supporters outside the school. This wasn't just their fight anymore. It had become something much bigger. The Internal Affairs Office was buzzing with activity 3 days after the incident. Detective Sarah Martinez, no relation to the police chief, sat at her desk reviewing Officer Barrett's personnel file. What she found made her stomach turn. "Chief, you need to see this," she called out, spreading documents across her desk. "Barrett has had 27 complaints filed against him in the past 2 years. All of them involved young black or Hispanic men. All of them were dismissed without investigation." Chief Martinez leaned over her desk, his face growing darker with each document he read. Someone had been burying these complaints, and he had a feeling he knew who was responsible. Across town, Dr. Thompson sat in a private meeting with Lisa Chen, an investigative reporter from the city's largest newspaper. Mr. Chen, who had recorded the incident, was her father, and she had been digging into police records for months. "Look at these traffic stop numbers," Lisa said, showing Dr. Thompson her laptop. "Barrett pulls over minority drivers 8 times more often than white drivers. But that's not even the worst part." She clicked to another screen. "He's part of a group of officers who call themselves the Cleaners. They target minority neighborhoods, plant evidence, and split money from illegal searches." Dr. Thompson's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "Do you have proof?" Lisa nodded, pulling out a USB drive. Body camera footage that was supposed to be deleted. One of the evidence room techs saved copies. He's been waiting for the right time to come forward. Meanwhile, at River Heights High, Marcus and Michael were leaving basketball practice when they saw a familiar face waiting by their car. It was Tommy Barrett, Officer Barrett's 16-year-old son. The twins tensed up, but Tommy raised his hands to show he meant no harm. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying. "I need to tell you something," Tommy said, his voice shaking. "About my dad and what he does with his police friends. I can't stay quiet anymore." In the school parking lot, Tommy told them everything. How he had overheard his father and other officers planning their patrols. How they targeted specific neighborhoods and kept 2 sets of records. How they bragged about their actions during backyard barbecues, thinking no one was listening. Michael recorded everything on his phone while Marcus took notes. Their father had taught them to always document everything. Back at the police station, Detective Martinez was showing Chief Martinez another disturbing discovery. "These seizure reports don't match the evidence room logs," she explained. "Thousands of dollars in cash and valuables are missing. And look who signed off on all these reports." The chief's face hardened as he read the signature. Captain Robert Fuller, head of internal affairs. The same person who had dismissed all the complaints against Barrett. Dr. Thompson's office was now a command center for the investigation. Civil rights lawyers, community leaders, and investigators worked around the clock, piecing together evidence. On his wall, a large map of the city showed pins marking every incident involving Barrett and his group. "We found another witness," his assistant announced, walking in with a young man in a security guard uniform. "He worked night shift at the mini-mart on Grove Street. Says he has surveillance footage of Barrett and other officers conducting illegal searches." The security guard, Kevin Williams, looked nervous but determined. "They didn't know about the new cameras we installed last month," he explained. "I got everything on video, then planting evidence, taking money from people, all of it." At home that evening, the Thompson family received an unexpected visitor. It was Officer Sarah Collins, Barrett's former partner. "I can't be part of this anymore," she said, placing her badge on their coffee table. "I've watched them get away with this for too long. I have dates, names, recordings, everything you need to bring down not just Barrett, but the whole corrupt group." Dr. Thompson called his legal team immediately. This was the breakthrough they needed. As night fell over the city, different players in this growing drama made their moves. Chief Martinez secured all evidence rooms with trusted officers. Detective Martinez backed up all her files to multiple secure locations. Lisa Chen submitted her first draft to her editor. And somewhere in the city, Officer Barrett met secretly with Captain Fuller, both men unaware that their world was about to collapse. The next 24 hours would change everything. The morning sun had barely risen when the FBI vehicles pulled up outside the police station. Agent Diana Williams stepped out, holding a thick folder of documents. After reviewing the evidence Dr. Thompson and Lisa Chen had gathered, the federal authorities had decided to step in. Inside his office, Captain Fuller was frantically shredding papers when his door burst open. Chief Martinez stood there with 2 FBI agents. "Robert Fuller, step away from the shredder," Agent Williams ordered, her badge gleaming under the office lights. "Everything in this office is now evidence in a federal investigation." Across town, Officer Barrett sat in his kitchen, watching the morning news with shaking hands. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen: "FBI raids police station, corruption investigation underway." His phone buzzed. It was a message from Captain Fuller. "Meet at the usual place. Now." Barrett grabbed his keys. not knowing he was already being followed by unmarked police cars. At River Heights High School, Marcus and Michael Thompson were called to the principal's office. When they arrived, they found Tommy Barrett waiting there with a social worker. "My dad's going to kill me for this," Tommy said, wiping tears from his eyes. He pulled out an old phone from his backpack. "But I have to show you what's on here. It's my dad's old phone. He forgot I knew his password." The phone contained hundreds of text messages between Barrett and other corrupt officers. They discussed their illegal activities openly, believing their messages were secure. There were even photos of them splitting money taken during illegal searches. Meanwhile, at the city courthouse, Dr. Thompson met with District Attorney Rachel Martinez, the chief's sister. The DA's office had been gathering its own evidence for months, but hadn't had enough to move forward until now. With Officer Collins' testimony and Tommy Barrett's evidence, DA Martinez explained, "We can bring charges against 13 officers, but there's something bigger here." She opened her laptop, showing Dr. Thompson the spreadsheet. "These officers have connections to 3 other police departments in neighboring cities. This isn't just a local problem." In a small diner on the edge of town, Barrett met with Captain Fuller. Neither man noticed the unmarked cars in the parking lot or the undercover officers sitting at nearby tables. "We need to get rid of everything," Fuller whispered urgently. "They're digging too deep. If they find the offshore accounts..." Before Barrett could respond, his phone buzzed again. It was Tommy. "Dad, I know what you did. I gave them your old phone." Barrett's face went pale. That phone had everything: messages, photos, banking details. His hands started to shake as he remembered all the incriminating evidence stored on it. Back at the Thompson house, Sarah Thompson answered a knock at the door. She found Kevin Williams, the security guard, looking terrified. "They know I talked to you," he said quickly. "Someone broke into my apartment last night. They took my laptop, but they don't know about this." He handed her a small USB drive. "It's all backed up here. Every video, every illegal search, everything." Dr. Thompson's legal team worked frantically to process all the new evidence. Lisa Chen had discovered that the corruption went beyond just illegal searches and racial profiling. The officers had connections to local drug dealers, accepting bribes to look the other way while targeting innocent people to meet their arrest quotas. At the FBI field office, Agent Williams reviewed Tommy Barrett's evidence. The messages revealed a sophisticated operation that had been running for years. Officers would target young minority men, plant evidence, then split any cash or valuables they found. They even had a point system, treating it like a game. As evening approached, Barrett and Fuller left the diner, planning to flee the city. But as they reached their cars, they found themselves surrounded by FBI agents and police cars. James Barrett, Robert Fuller, Agent Williams called out through a megaphone, "You're under arrest." Barrett looked desperately for an escape route, his mind racing. In his pocket, his phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from Officer Collins. "It's over, James. Don't make it worse than it already is." The truth was finally coming to light, and there was nowhere left to hide. The police station buzzed with tension as Officer Barrett sat in the interrogation room. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cool air conditioning. Through the one-way glass, Dr. Thompson watched alongside FBI Agent Williams and Chief Martinez. "Your son did the right thing, Barrett," Agent Williams said, laying out printed copies of text messages from his old phone. "He's braver than you ever were." Barrett's hands trembled as he looked at the evidence. Years of corruption spread across the metal table in neat folders. His son's statement lay on top, Tommy's familiar handwriting cutting through his heart. "I want my lawyer," Barrett mumbled, but his voice lacked confidence. Dr. Thompson stepped into the room, his presence commanding attention. He wasn't here as a lawyer today, but as a father. Marcus and Michael stood behind him, their faces strong and determined. "My sons could have died that day," Dr. Thompson said quietly, placing both hands on the table. "Just like Kevin Rogers could have died last year, or David Chen the year before that. How many lives have you destroyed, Officer Barrett?" Barrett's chest tightened. The faces of all the young men he had wrongly arrested flashed through his mind. "I was just doing my job," he whispered. "Your job?" Michael stepped forward. "Your job was to protect people. Instead, you hunted them. You turned police work into a game. We saw your point system. Extra points for younger targets, bonus points for honor students. Was that supposed to be funny? Marcus joined his brother. You had a choice every single day. Every time you put on that badge, you could have chosen to be better. To be like Officer Collins, who finally stood up against what was wrong. The room felt smaller to Barrett. His breathing became labored as more people entered. Lisa Chen with her evidence files, Kevin Williams with his surveillance footage, and Officer Collins with years of witness statements. Your offshore accounts have been frozen, Agent Williams continued. We found everything. The money you stole, the evidence you planted, the lives you ruined. It's all here. Barrett loosened his collar. The walls seemed to be closing in. On the table, his phone lit up with a text from Tommy. I'm sorry, Dad, but you taught me that bad people need to face consequences. I can't. Barrett gasped, clutching his chest. I need air. Dr. Thompson recognized the signs immediately. He's having a cardiac event. Call an ambulance. The room erupted into action. Chief Martinez rushed in with the station's medical kit, while Agent Williams called 911. Barrett slumped in his chair, his face gray and sweating. Dr. Sarah Thompson, who had been waiting outside, ran in with her medical bag. As a doctor, her instincts took over despite everything this man had done to her sons. Heart rate irregular, blood pressure dropping, she reported, checking his vitals. Possible stress-induced cardiac episode. The paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing Barrett out on a stretcher. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Tommy arrived at the station, tears streaming down his face. Is he going to die? Tommy asked, his voice breaking. Despite everything, Barrett was still his father. Marcus and Michael, remembering their own father's teachings about compassion, stood beside Tommy. The best doctors will take care of him, Marcus assured him. Dr. Thompson watched the ambulance drive away, its sirens wailing through the evening air. The evidence they gathered wouldn't disappear just because Barrett was hospitalized. If anything, his medical condition would prevent him from fleeing justice. Inside the station, Agent Williams gathered her team. Barrett might be down, but this isn't over. We still have 11 other officers to arrest, plus the connections to other departments. Chief Martinez nodded grimly. And Captain Fuller is still missing. He slipped away during the confusion. Dr. Thompson put his arms around his sons. The day's events had been intense, but they had stood strong together. This is just the beginning, he told them. Real change takes time. As night fell over the city, Barrett's hospital room was placed under guard, whether he recovered or not. The system he had corrupted was finally being exposed to the light. In his pocket, his phone buzzed one last time before falling silent. 1 week after Barrett's collapse, the Thompson family sat in the front row of the city council chamber. The room was packed with community members, reporters, and activists. On the wall-mounted screens, Barrett's hospital room was shown via video link, where he remained under medical supervision. This isn't just about one officer anymore, Dr. Thompson addressed the council, his voice firm and clear. This is about a system that allowed corruption to flourish. Today, we demand change. Behind him, Marcus and Michael sat with Tommy Barrett. Despite his father's actions, the twins had taken Tommy under their wing. They understood he was also a victim of his father's choices. The evidence is overwhelming, District Attorney Martinez presented, clicking through slides of data. In the past 5 years, minority youth were 9 times more likely to be arrested in our city. 90% of those arrests were made by the same group of officers. The council members looked shocked as more details emerged. Lisa Chen's investigation had uncovered a pattern that stretched back decades. But here's what's different now. Lisa stood up, holding a thick stack of papers. We have 300 signed statements from victims of this corruption. People who were afraid to speak up before are finally coming forward. In his hospital bed, Barrett watched the proceedings on TV. The doctors said his heart attack had been severe, but he would recover. His son Tommy had visited him yesterday, not with anger, but with hope for change. Dad, Tommy had said, Marcus and Michael's father says everyone deserves a chance to make things right, even you. Now, Barrett listened as Officer Collins testified about the corruption she had witnessed. His former partner's words cut deep, but they were true. Years of wrongdoing were being exposed to the light. Back in the council chamber, Michael Thompson stepped up to speak. His voice shook slightly, but his words were strong. I used to be afraid every time I saw a police car, he admitted. My brother and I would take different routes home from school, thinking we'd be safer if we split up. We were honor students, athletes, good kids, but none of that mattered to officers like Barrett. Marcus joined his brother at the podium, but we also know there are good police officers. Officer Collins showed us that. The question is, how do we make sure the good ones are protected when they stand up against the bad ones? Chief Martinez stood next, surprising everyone with his announcement. Today, I'm proposing a complete overhaul of our department's oversight system. Independent civilian review boards, mandatory body cameras with automatic upload to secure servers, and a new community liaison program. The crowd murmured as he continued. And to lead this program, I'm nominating Officer Sarah Collins. Her courage in exposing this corruption proves she's the right person for the job. Dr. Thompson watched proudly as his sons handed out copies of their proposed reforms. The twins had spent days working with community leaders and reform-minded officers to create a practical plan for change. In another part of town, FBI agents finally caught up with Captain Fuller. He had been hiding at a small motel, preparing to flee the country. They found him with suitcases full of cash and multiple fake passports. Back at the council meeting, the vote was unanimous. The reforms would begin immediately, but Dr. Thompson knew this was just the beginning. Real change happens slowly, he told the gathered crowd. We need everyone to stay involved, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay united. As the meeting ended, Tommy Barrett approached the podium. His hands trembled, but his voice was clear. My father made terrible choices, he said, but his actions helped expose a broken system. Now it's our job to fix it, not with anger or violence, but with justice and truth. The Thompson twins stood with Tommy as cameras flashed. 3 teenagers from different worlds, united by a shared hope for change. In his hospital room, Barrett watched his son on TV. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: shame, but also hope. Maybe it wasn't too late to help make things right. Outside the city hall, the evening sun cast long shadows as people gathered in small groups, discussing the day's events. Change was coming to their city, and this time, it would last. 2 weeks after the city council meeting, Officer Barrett sat up in his hospital bed, preparing for one of the most important moments of his life. Today, he would testify against his former colleagues and expose everything he knew about the department's corruption. Are you sure you want to do this? Tommy asked, sitting beside his father's bed. The boy had visited every day, watching his father struggle with the weight of his past actions. Barrett nodded slowly. For the first time in my life, I'm going to do the right thing. He looked at his son with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn what you knew all along. The hospital room had been converted into a temporary courtroom due to Barrett's medical condition. Judge Maria Rodriguez would hear his testimony, while cameras would broadcast the proceedings to the main courthouse where the public could watch. Dr. Thompson sat in the front row with Marcus and Michael. They had agreed to be present, showing that this was about justice, not revenge. Officer Collins sat nearby, ready to corroborate Barrett's testimony. Officer James Barrett, Judge Rodriguez began, you understand that by testifying today, you're admitting to serious crimes that will carry consequences. Yes, Your Honor, Barrett replied, his voice stronger than it had been in days. I'm ready to tell the truth. All of it. For the next 3 hours, Barrett detailed years of systematic corruption. He named officers who had participated in illegal searches, described how they planted evidence, and explained their point system for targeting minority youth. We called ourselves the Cleaners, Barrett admitted, shame clear in his voice. We thought we were cleaning up the streets, but we were the ones making them dirty. We ruined innocent lives for money and promotions. In the main courthouse, hundreds watched on large screens as Barrett continued his testimony. Among them were many of his victims, finally hearing the truth about why they had been targeted. The day I stopped the Thompson twins, Barrett said, looking directly at Marcus and Michael, I didn't have any real reason. They were just walking home. But they fit our profile, young, black, in a nice neighborhood. We called it fishing in clean waters. Dr. Thompson watched as his sons listened intently. They had grown stronger through this experience, turning their pain into purpose. Captain Fuller ran the whole operation, Barrett continued. He protected us from internal affairs investigations, helped us hide the money, and chose which neighborhoods to target. But the real corruption was in our minds, thinking some people deserved to be treated like criminals just because of how they looked. In another room, FBI agents took notes as Barrett provided account numbers, dates, and locations of evidence that had been planted or stolen. His testimony would help them crack similar corruption cases in other cities. Tommy watched his father with mixed emotions. The man he had feared and admired was transforming before his eyes into someone new, someone honest, even if broken. The hardest part wasn't doing the wrong thing, Barrett admitted, his voice cracking. The hardest part was teaching my son that it was right. Tommy, I'm so sorry. Judge Rodriguez called a brief recess as Barrett's heart monitor showed increased stress. During the break, Dr. Thompson approached Barrett's bed. What made you change? He asked simply. Barrett looked at his son, then at the Thompson twins, seeing the truth through their eyes. Tommy showed me what real courage looks like when he stood up against his own father. And your son showed me what real strength looks like when they fought for justice instead of revenge. When the testimony resumed, Barrett provided key evidence about Captain Fuller's overseas accounts and connections to corrupt officers in other departments. His words would help investigations across the country. As the day drew to a close, Judge Rodriguez made her final notes. Barrett's testimony had lasted nearly 6 hours, but its impact would be felt for years to come. Outside the hospital, protesters who had gathered weekly since the incident began packing up their signs. Some cried, finally feeling heard. Others hugged, sharing the weight of the moment. The truth had finally been spoken. Now the real work of healing could begin. 6 months after Barrett's testimony, the Thompson family gathered with hundreds of community members in the newly renamed Unity Park. The same place where Marcus and Michael had once feared to walk was now a symbol of change. Marcus stood at the podium, addressing the crowd at the opening ceremony of the Youth Justice Center. The modern building behind him would serve as a hub for police community relations and youth advocacy programs. 6 months ago, we were victims, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the crowd. Today we're leaders. This center will help make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. Michael joined his brother, holding up their new book, Breaking the Code of Silence, which documented their experience and the changes it sparked. The book had already become required reading for police academies across the country. In the audience, Officer Barrett sat in a wheelchair, still recovering from his heart condition. After serving 3 months in a minimum security facility, he had been released early due to health issues and his cooperation. Now he worked with the center's rehabilitation program, sharing his story to help other officers recognize and resist corrupt practices. Tommy sat beside his father, wearing his new Youth Ambassador badge. The program, created by the Thompson twins, helped build bridges between police officers' families and the community. The old system didn't just hurt its victims, Tommy told the crowd when it was his turn to speak. It hurt everyone, including the families of corrupt officers. But change is possible if we're brave enough to stand up for what's right. Dr. Thompson watched proudly as Officer Collins, now Captain Collins, announced the latest statistics. Arrests were down by 60%, while community trust in police had doubled. The new oversight programs had already caught and prevented several instances of potential misconduct. Real change takes time, Captain Collins explained, but it also takes trust. Every day, we're working to earn back the community's faith in law enforcement. In the front row, Lisa Chen sat taking notes for her Pulitzer-nominated series on police reform. Her investigations had helped uncover similar corruption in 12 other cities, leading to nationwide changes in police oversight. Chief Martinez stepped up next, announcing the graduation of the first class of officers trained under the new community-based program. These officers learned from our mistakes, he said. They were trained not just in law enforcement, but in community service, cultural understanding, and ethical decision-making. The new graduates included Kevin Williams, the security guard whose evidence had helped break the case. He had decided to become a police officer himself, wanting to be part of the solution. Dr. Sarah Thompson wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her sons cut the ribbon to officially open the center. The building would house counseling services, legal aid, youth programs, and a civilian oversight board. Our sons could have chosen anger, she whispered to her husband. Instead, they chose to make a difference. Barrett looked at the Thompson twins, remembering that evening 6 months ago when he had stopped them for no reason. His actions, born from years of prejudice and corruption, had inadvertently sparked a movement for change. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make things right," he had told the judge at his sentencing. Now, he spent his days speaking to police cadets about the importance of integrity and the terrible cost of bias. As the ceremony ended, Marcus and Michael invited everyone inside to tour the new facility. The walls were lined with photos documenting both the darker history they were leaving behind and the brighter future they were building. In one corner, a group of teenage boys, black, white, Hispanic, and Asian, gathered around a former officer, asking questions about community policing. In another, Captain Collins led a workshop on recognizing and reporting misconduct. Tommy joined the Thompson twins as they walked through their new youth center. "You know what's weird?" he said. "If my dad hadn't stopped you that day, none of this would exist." Marcus smiled. "Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best changes." Outside, the sun set on Unity Park, where children now played freely, regardless of their color. The old fear was fading, replaced by hope for a better future. The system hadn't just been reformed, it had been transformed. And it all started with two brothers walking home from basketball practice, refusing to let injustice have the final word.